Hey there, nightworms and horror aficionados. My name is Steve Kozeniewski, and I am an author of horror and science fiction. I was very honored to be invited to give you a reading this weekend, so I'll try not to ramble on too much and get straight into it. I'd like to read to you this evening from The Perfectly Fine House, which comes from Grindhouse Press, and they are a perfectly fine press. It is also a collaboration I did with Wile E. who you will also find reading from one of his solo works, I believe, this weekend. Now, I am going to read from The Perfectly Fine House. I've heard a couple of actually really good renditions of the prologue already are out there, including from Wile E. and from the Butterflies Make Me Angry podcast. So I'm going to skip ahead and do chapter 1. And just real brief, I already feel like I'm going a little bit long on my preamble, so I won't go too deeply into what the book's about. I think you'll pick up a few things as we go along. But basically, this book takes place in an alternate reality where ghosts are real, they're accepted as real. Seeing your dead grandmother is as normal as walking down the street. And it's about a pair of twins, one living, one dead, and their interactions with the titular Perfectly Fine House. So in this chapter, we're going to meet the not really older because they're twins, but the more mature and more older acting sister, Donna. So this is chapter 1 of The Perfectly Fine House. You see, what people don't understand is this is what true love looks like. Donna tried her best to feign interest. She'd been able to successfully plaster a smile on her face and pretend she cared 500,000 times before. But for some reason, listening to the endless story of the endless love between Willie Chang and Lydia dos Santos was intolerable. Donna fiddled with an invoice from last week, double-checking all the numbers added up and trying to recall whether she had paid her surrogate for that day yet. She hoped it seemed like she was taking notes about the lovebirds situation, but in truth, she was past caring. People think it's strange, Lydia chimed in for what seemed like the first time since the couple had walked in the door. But are we supposed to live our lives? Sorry, Willie. Go through our existences based on what people think? Lydia was still alive, but at a glance might have been mistaken for dead. She had dyed her hair and carefully made up her face in tinctures of black, white, and gray, so she bore a passing resemblance to a ghost. She was a member of the youth subculture which called themselves the unenlightened, and which most people, on both sides of the life gap, called ghost fuckers behind their back. The unenlightened made up such a substantial portion of Donna's clientele that she had long since grown accustomed to their eccentricities. Don't worry about it, Snuggle Bunny, Willie replied, nuzzling the nape of his girlfriend's neck. It's not the 50s anymore. Donna nodded with what she hoped was the proper appearance of sympathy. She wanted to tell them she wasn't a shrink, but this was just a part of the surrogacy business. People always wanted her to understand why they were seeking a corporeal surrogate. The truth was, as long as their checks cleared, Donna couldn't have cared less about their reasons. Is that when you passed away? Donna asked, pushing aside the invoice and opening her laptop to add a few lines to her budgeting spreadsheet. Willie nodded. It was 57. Not a great time to be a Chinese American. Or a ghost. It was a mess being both. Well, I can only imagine. Well, things aren't like that anymore, Lydia said, turning and holding up her hand. The ghost took Lydia's hand and squeezed it. They'd only met a half hour before, so Willie was still practically transparent to Donna's eyes. She imagined for Lydia he appeared about as substantial as a ghost can get, and his hand would be practically solid as long as he was concentrating. But it was quite simply impossible to concentrate through something as physically and emotionally taxing as sex. That was where Donna and her surrogacy agency came in. The sign emblazoned on the glass storefront said, "We don't believe in unhappy endings." It was her old partner, Jack Spender's favorite saying, and in light of all the bad breakups and terminated contracts she dealt with over the years, it felt more than a little ironic now. But for new arrivals like Lydia and Willie, the slogan always rang true. Well, we have several excellent packages for you to consider, Donna said, pointing at the chart on the wall behind her desk. I think we should start with your standard overnight package. That's $500 for 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. Will the surrogate... Will he look like Willie? It was a common question, and she had a canned response. All I can promise you is I'll find a handsome young man of about Willie's age. But the truth is, once Willie possesses him, it won't matter what he looks like. You'll see and feel and hear Willie. You're going to be making love to the person, not the body. They exchanged a glance, but Donna wasn't worried they'd walk. She had carefully honed that response over her years of doing this work, and 9 times out of 10, the couple just nodded and continued. The rest of the time, she had to wait until they got desperate, or broke up, whichever came first. This is a little more delicate, Lydia continued. But what happens to the handsome young man while Willie's inside him? What I mean is, where does he go? Well, that's a common question. During possession, the soul of the living person becomes what we call pushed aside. A lot of my surrogates have described it as like being in a half-remembered nightmare. I think it might be a bit like falling into a coma. So they're not pushed out? They can't, float around? Donna shook her head. No, when a spirit is pushed aside, he can't manifest as a ghost. Not a lot is known about the phenomenon, really. I guess it's like the hiccups or the common cold. It doesn't really bother anyone enough to solve. Some people think the soul is actually shoved out of the body, but since the person isn't dead, they simply fail to exist. Others think the soul is compressed down, like being locked away in a box. It's a bit uncomfortable, but it's not painful, and I assure you I carefully monitor all of my surrogates for possible long-term ill effects. Nobody's going to die or go crazy or have any permanent issues because you sign up for this service. They nodded and exchanged a few words. It seemed like they hadn't really been very concerned about that after all, but she'd appropriately cut off their total lack of concern. She waited patiently before finally prompting. Any other questions? Have you ever been in love, Miss Fitzpatrick? Donna's hands pressed down on the keyboard, leaving a long, nonsensical string of letters on her spreadsheet. Her mouth worked, as though trying to put together a few words. She didn't know how to respond. No one was interested in a sow like her. It was years since she'd even had a fumbling grope session in the back of a car. I meant about the process. Her office phone began to ring. She smiled sheepishly, but silently thanked the caller for interrupting this awkward conversation. Sorry, I have to take this. My receptionist is on vacation. Boy, did she need it, too, she said, taking the phone from its cradle. The truth was her receptionist had quit about 18 months ago, due to being overworked, and Donna had yet to replace her. Fitzpatrick and Spender. A ghastly voice, dripping with venom and pure malice, responded. Don't go into the basement. Excuse me for just a moment, she said, reaching out and pressing a button to put the call on hold. Lydia, if you like, there's coffee and danishes. Donna rose and stepped into the back room, a cluttered warehouse-like area which she had never let the customers see. She picked up the receiver from the landline and jabbed at the blinking button containing her call. What do you want, Jack? The voice on the other end of the line chuckled and returned to its usual, jovial, avuncular self. How'd you know it was me? Her partner asked. A little bird told me. What do you want? Why, I'm doing very well. Thanks for asking, Fitz. How are you doing? Just peachy. How much do you need me to wire you? Have you ever been to India? Spender didn't wait for a response. You must. It's incredible here. Tibet, the way they treat the dead, it's incredible. I've heard Japan is nice when it comes to that, too, Donna said. So, you running out of rupees? Need an extension on your credit line? There wasn't actually silence on the other end of the line. It sounded like Spender was at a bazaar or something. The chattering of hawkers and livestock in the background continued unabated, but Jack stopped speaking for a moment. Credit line, he replied finally. What's that supposed to mean? It means I've got a ghost fucker and... Donna looked back toward the office and realized she was shouting way too loudly. She cast a wish to the universe Lydia and Willie hadn't heard her. She lowered her voice substantially and continued. It means I've got an unenlightened and her boyfriend in here, and they're not the only ones in line. It means I'm up to my eyeballs in fucking paperwork, and you call once a week like clockwork, never to help, always to beg for cash. Who the hell do you think you are? I built that company from the ground up. I brought you on board, made you a partner. You wouldn't have anything if it wasn't for me. And you talk about credit lines, like I didn't work myself to death for every penny that business is worth. Donna pressed at her temple, which was pounding in rhythm with her heartbeat. She couldn't deny any of what Spender was saying, and yet he still came to her, palm upward, looking for handouts from a company he hadn't made a meaningful contribution to since his death 2 years ago. "You're right, Jack," she said with a long, drawn-out sigh. "I'm sorry. Let me wire you in advance on your share. Will 500 do it?" The sound of smacking lips came through the phone line, making Donna roll her eyes. "You're beautiful, Fitz. I ever tell you that? I'm about 50 pounds overweight, and no man will give me a second look." "Now, that's not true. You are a handsome woman, and the right guy will come for you. If not now, then maybe you can hook up with a nice young ghost fucker after your big day." After a beat, he added as an afterthought, many, many years from now, of course. "This is a high-stress industry. I could have a heart attack and die tomorrow, the same way—" She trailed off, not adding, "You did." "Same as me. Well, listen, dying is the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm seeing the world, enjoying my existence, finally, like I never did when I was alive. Listen, here's the account number to send the 500. Spender began rattling off numbers. Donna copied them down directly onto the corkboard, unable to find a loose scrap of paper. She hung up the phone without any pleasantries. She glanced in the mirror and tucked a red lock back. Sometimes she didn't think she looked so bad from certain angles, but right now she was sweating up a storm. She blanched her forehead with a towel, took a deep breath, and walked back out. "I'm so sorry about that," Donna said, holding her hand out to apologize. At least, that's what she meant to say. Instead, she collapsed in a heap, feeling the blood rushing to her head and blackness overtaking her vision. Thanks, everybody, and if you like that, that is The Perfectly Fine House from Grindhouse Press by Stephen Kozeniewski and Wile E. If you would like to buy a paperback copy, that would be really great for my publisher, and I hope you enjoyed it.